All right, I think we can get started. I'd like to extend a warm welcome to everyone joining us today. My name is Sandra Sujin Lee, and I'm the Chief of the Division of Ethics and Professor of Medical Humanities and Ethics here at Columbia University. I also have the privilege of leading the Teams resource at the Columbia University Irving Institute for Clinical and Translational Research. This event is a jointly sponsored event, and it is the second Bioethics in Film from Screen to Seminar event of 2024, which is a Division of Ethics series that aims to convene a broad audience around films, documentaries, and television to explore critical ethical issues that impact biomedical research and health. As a jointly sponsored event, today is also the second Grand Rounds in Team Science, or GRITS, event for the 23-24 academic year. Our first GRITS was in the fall with Dr. Betsy Rowland, who spoke on the impact of academic culture on interdisciplinary collaboration. In today's session, we will continue our exploration of academic culture and institutional practice by focusing on key questions of equity and the professional development of women in science. We are thrilled to be able to engage four amazing women for this discussion and to highlight brilliant works produced by two of our panelists. The first is the book, The Exceptions, published by Scribner in 2023 by Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Kate Zernike, and the documentary Picture a Scientist, directed and produced by Sharon Shattuck. These works provide a rich, nuanced look into the lives of women scientists and how their trajectories have been shaped by the social cultural beliefs and practices in major research universities. To help us explore the insights and issues raised in The Exceptions and Picture a Scientist, we're very fortunate to have faculty members Gissette Reyes-Soffer and Mimi Shirasu-Hiza here for this dialogue. But before I turn to doing proper introductions of our speakers, I wanted to go over some housekeeping items. So first, we're asking that all attendees please abide by the code of conduct, which is described in the link that can be found in the chat. We have a live closed captioner present for this event. If you wish to use closed captioning, please turn on the CC button at the bottom of your screen. We are fortunate to have many of you with us today, both at Columbia and outside, and we ask you that you please submit your questions for the panelists in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. You can register your enthusiasm for a question and elevate it up the list by using the upvote button in the Q&A box. The chat is available for further engagement, and you are welcome to drop comments and resources there to share with others. If you have any logistical problems or questions, please do email us at mhe_ethics@cumc-columbia.edu at any time. Okay, so now it is my pleasure to give you a more detailed introduction to our four panelists. The first, Kate Zernike, is a national correspondent for the New York Times, where she writes about abortion in the post-Roe era. She has been a reporter at the Times since 2000 and was a member of the team that won the 2002 Pulitzer Prize for explanatory reporting for stories about al-Qaeda before and after the 9/11 terror attacks. She was previously a reporter for the Boston Globe, where she broke the story of MIT's admission that it had discriminated against women on its faculty, on which the book highlighted for this session, entitled The Exceptions, Nancy Hopkins and the Fight for Women in Science, is based. She is the daughter and granddaughter of scientists. She is a graduate of Trinity College at the University of Toronto and the Graduate School of Journalism at our own Columbia University. She lives in New Jersey and with her husband and sons. Sharon Shattuck is a documentary filmmaker and podcast host. Her film, Picture a Scientist, was nominated for a 2022 News and Documentary Emmy Award and was distributed on Netflix and PBS Nova. Other works by Sharon is From This Day Forward, which was a New York Times Critics Pick and her Emmy-nominated science short film series, Animated Life, which is available on the New York Times OpDocs. She's the co-host of the podcast Conviction, American Panic on Spotify. The subject of the show was exonerated in 2023, due in part to their reporting. Sharon has degrees in forest ecology and biology from the University of Michigan and a graduate degree in journalism from NYU. She lives in Brooklyn with her husband and toddler. Our third panelist is a member of our own faculty, Mimi Shirasu-Hiza, who is a professor of genetics and development at CUIMC. She received her PhD in biology from the University of California, San Francisco, completing her doctoral research in the lab of Timothy Mitchison. She was then a postdoctoral fellow at Stanford University in David Schneider's lab. Dr. Shirasu-Hiza's lab currently aims to understand how specific circadian regulated physiological functions contribute to health and disease using Drosophila melanogaster. The lab's overarching goal is to use circadian biology as a prism to understand the interaction, coordination, and regulation of complex physiologies in the whole animal that contribute to disease pathology. Dr. Shirasu-Hiza's lab specifically focuses on innate immune cell function, metabolism, and sleep. As the director of the genetics graduate program, Dr. Shirasu-Hiza is deeply interested in identifying best practices for graduate student mentorship and training, as well as understanding how to create diverse, equitable, and inclusive scientific environments. And finally, we have Dr. Gissette Reyes-Soffer, who is an assistant professor of medicine in the Department of Medicine, Division of Preventive Medicine and Nutrition at CUIMC. She is an NIH, American Health Association, and industry-funded mid-career investigator, examining the metabolic pathways that regulate lipid and lipoprotein metabolism in humans. Her work has been published in numerous journals, including the Journal of Clinical Investigation, Science and Translational Medicine, and Circulation. She is a co-founder of a local academic peer mentoring initiative, CTSA supported, called Accountability and Safe Space to Promote, Inspire, Recharge, and Empower, hence the acronym ASPIRE, ! And has mentored numerous trainees from through her volunteer and leadership roles within the AHA, Arteriosclerosis, Thrombosis, and Vascular Biology Council. She is a member of the North American Vascular Biology Organization and the American College of Cardiology. She is also on the Scientific Advisory Board for the National Lipid Association and member of the Programming Board for the American Diabetes Association Scientific Sessions. She is a standing member of the NIH National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute Mentored Patient-Oriented Research Study Section and serves on the scientific board of the Family Heart Foundation and the LPA Forum. So as you can see here, we have four incredible women who have agreed to engage us in the focus of today's discussion, which is going to be on equity in biomedical research. Now, there are numerous studies in the science of team science literature that have documented that the equitable representation of women is critical for the development process and outcomes of scientific teams. In a 2021 NSF report, it was noted that among people between the ages of 18 and 74, women make up about a third of people employed in STEM occupations. This is not just a US disparity, but a global one. In an article written for the United Nations by Shamila Nair-Boudial, the Assistant Director General for Natural Sciences at UNESCO, she wrote in her recent article, "The Lack of Gender Equality in Science is Everyone's Problem," in which she argues that gender inequity is impeding economic growth and development worldwide. She points out important facts that female researchers tend to have shorter, well less paid careers. Their work is underrepresented in high-profile journals. They are often passed over for promotion. Women are typically given smaller research grants than their male colleagues and earn less recognition from their peers, with only 12% of members of national science academies identifying as women. So we're going to explore why this is in the next hour and a half that we have together. We're going to try to understand why these inequities and the practices that lead to these outcomes are often rendered invisible, and what can be done, both on the part of individuals, but also institutions like our own, what can be done in terms of creating change. So I want to turn to the panelists, and I think, are we all good with, I should have asked you before we began, are we all good with first names as a way of address? Okay, great, yes. So Kate, I'm gonna start with you. First of all, I want to congratulate you on your book. Your book beautifully details the lives of women who you call exceptions. And I do want you to explain the title, if you will. But could you just start by describing, the book and why you wrote it, and maybe if you want to read an excerpt, that would be terrific, actually.
Yeah, sure. Well, thank you for having me, and I'm excited to be here today. And Sharon, I should say, I did another event last night, and I saw the film. I think it's actually the K through 12 academic version of the film. But I will say that every time, I wrote this story, I broke the story about these women at MIT who really started this revolution for women in science in 1999. And I've seen the film before, and I've obviously written this book. And yet every time I hear the story, I find it incredibly stirring and motivating. So I hope everyone else will emerge from the discussion today with the same feeling. As I say, I was a reporter in 1999, and I got this tip. I was a reporter at the Boston Globe, and I got a tip that there was something going on with women and discrimination at MIT. And so I was given the name of this woman, Nancy Hopkins. My father, as you said, had been a scientist and had talked to me about the lack of women in science. So I knew that, there was something here, but I wasn't prepared for what I found, which was that when I called Nancy Hopkins, she told me that, in fact, MIT was going to acknowledge, the president of MIT was going to admit that the university had discriminated against women on its faculty, which really was a strikingly brave and bold thing to do, especially in 1999. I think none of us were expecting that. And then she talked to me about how this had happened because because the group of women at the School of Science at MIT had come together and gathered their data to prove their case, which I thought was like a wonderful testament to science itself. These women had really leaned into their passion for science to make their case about discrimination. And they were talking about a new kind of discrimination, which wasn't the traditional, what I thought of discrimination, which was the door had been closed to women, right? Like, from my perspective, I was about 30 at the time, the door had been opened. And what they taught me, and I think taught the world and affirmed for many women in science in particular, was that it's not just about opening doors for women, it's about how you treat women over the course of their careers. So they talked about it they used the word unconscious bias, which was a new term at that point. By the time I came back to writing the book, I started in 2018, the term unconscious bias was so familiar that many people, I think, discount or continue to discount that it's real, or they think it's an excess of wokeism. So the challenge and the opportunity of the book was really to describe to people how it happens. And again, how it really is this small accumulation of slights over a career that can cause so much damage. And so I was lucky enough to have Nancy Hopkins as my protagonist, and to have her be willing to talk to me about how to tell the story of how this had happened to her over the course of her career. So just to set up the discussion, because MIT really, when MIT did this in 1999, it did kick off a discussion. It led to many of the reports, including the report that you're talking about, much more discussion of women in science. So I'm just going to read the first paragraph of the book, which sets the stage. In March of 1999, a story above the fold on the front page of the Boston Sunday Globe reported that the Massachusetts Institute of Technology had acknowledged long-standing discrimination against women on its science faculty. It was, quote, an extraordinary admission, as an article on the front page of the New York Times called it 2 days later, by which point the news had traveled around the world by radio, television, and a fever pitch of emails between female scientists who had long known they were not valued as highly as men, but talked about it only among themselves, if at all. Here was one of the most prestigious institutions in the world, synonymous with scientific excellence. The discrimination had happened not in some dark age, but in the 1990s, the dawn of a new millennium, decades after legislation and the women's movement had pushed open the doors of opportunity. Most women starting their careers at the time did not think bias would block them. Women who complained of discrimination typically ended up in the deadlock of he said, she said. Now the president of MIT was saying it was true. That admission came about not because of a lawsuit or formal complaint, but because of the work of 16 women who had started as strangers, working in secret, and gathered their case so methodically, like the scientists they were, that MIT could not ignore them. They upset the usual assumptions about why there were so few women in science and math, and unleashed a reckoning across the United States as the other universities, philanthropies, and government agencies rushed to address the bias and the disparities that had disadvantaged women for decades. Quote, a climate change and the whole of academia, as an astronomer at the California Institute of Technology called it. So, anyway, look forward to the discussion.
Yeah, no, thank you. That was a great way to open. Sharon, I want to go to you next. I have to say that I have been using your film in various classes for the last few years, and it's always very powerful, and it really catalyzes great discussion. I'm wondering if you could also just introduce folks who maybe haven't had a chance to see it. I do want to make sure that the audience know that that we do have a link to the film available to you all in case you haven't seen it yet. But Sharon, if you could take a moment just to orient folks to your piece, that would be great.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me. It's really a pleasure to be here and among such amazing company. So Picture Scientist. So the film started out like it was around 2018 when we were talking with somebody at the MIT Press actually, and they had said, hey, you should look into this story about Nancy Hopkins and the women that she was with at MIT. And so one of the first things we did is we found Kate's articles with the Boston Globe, and we were just struck by this amazing story. And we started talking with Nancy, and she's just the most inspiring, pleasant, like such a great person to talk to. So that's where we first were like, okay, maybe we make this story about the MIT story, maybe that's our film. But then we were like, things have improved, obviously, over the the women at MIT improved things for women in science a lot through their work, but it's not, we know that we're not done. Like there's still work to be done. And so where we decided to go from there was to look at other stories to try to bring into the film, so that it wasn't just the MIT story, so that was one of three different threads. Along with unconscious bias, which is like its own kind of fourth pod of the movie. And we really wanted to broaden the perspective and talk about, in the film, we talk about this iceberg analogy, which this NAS report uses, where it's like the tip of the iceberg are these really overt sexual harassment events. And then under the iceberg, there's just a lot more of this insidious, these little everyday slights, and how those can add up over the course of somebody's career into causing somebody to leave science. And so that's what we really wanted to do in the film, is to bring points from around this iceberg and try to show the different perspectives of women in science and also people of color in science. So that was really our hope. Yeah, so that's kind of what ended up becoming Picture a Scientist. Yeah.
That's
and
great.
Do we have should I show a clip now? Or
yeah, we do have the clip, I think, teed up. If that would be good to show now, that would be great. Do you want to say anything about the clip?
Yeah, I guess I should say before. So one thing that we thought about with the movie was we wanted it to be about both data and people's stories. Because these anecdotal stories aren't so anecdotal when you look at them in the aggregate and you realize that there is a pattern here, and there's a real, it's not just, people who had incidences of bad luck. It's like together you see it as a pattern and you see the data. And so in this clip, it's really Nancy Hopkins visits her friend, Dr. Mahzarin Banaji, who studies unconscious bias, and they just have a conversation. But I think it's a really, for us, I think tonight or today, I think it'll be really poignant and interesting.
Great. Great. And I think the volume isn't on.
recently somebody had shown me an email they'd received from a very distinguished scientist who happens to be a colleague of mine. So I was particularly upset by it, saying that he had looked very carefully and had seen no bias or prejudice against women during his entire career. And therefore he was confident that such thing did not exist. And I guess, at this point in time, 2019, this email was a few months ago, I just was shocked by this. These are great scientists. How can they not know this? How can they not believe this? If they know it, don't they believe it? This worries me a lot.
So when I hear stories like the one you tell, that your male colleague believes that he's never seen it, I have two kinds of responses to it. One, I understand that he may be truly unaware and genuinely believing that he's looking for it and just not seeing it. It's in the nature of this beast that we're trying to identify. It's invisible. But then I also feel that he has no business saying what he did, because today the evidence is so much more clear that he need not rely on his own personal experience. He just needs to look at the data. That's what he'd want us to do for his science. He'd say, Mahzarin, whatever you may think about turbulence or whatever, that doesn't matter. That's your intuitive experience of the physical world. But you need to know the research. And I would say the same to him, because the time has passed now for saying, I don't see it anywhere. And that's why we should be concerned that anybody who says it's not happening or not happening anymore is just made to retract those words, because they can say, I'm not going to change my behavior, I don't care about it, all of that, that's their opinion, but they cannot say that the evidence doesn't exist.
That's such an interesting clip. And I guess I'm heartened that evidence actually, I think what's being suggested there is that we need more evidence. And when faced with evidence, that might promote change. Does that resonate? Kate, I would love your thoughts on that. Is that true? Is that why you're seeing more and more discussion and perhaps a reflection on inequities that women face in science because of the evidence?
Unmuting. Yeah, I think this is why the MIT story did resonate. The MIT report, the MIT story, this admission by MIT came around because, as I said, the women had produced this report about the disparities, but there had been many, many reports from many different institutions, science faculties and otherwise. Harvard was doing one every year. Johns Hopkins had done one the year before. This was not a problem that no one had documented. What was so different about the MIT report were really two things. One was that the women really had leaned into the data, and two was the president's admission. But when I went to meet with Nancy Hopkins in her office when I first heard about the story, I said to her, how did this whole thing start? And she said, well, I needed more space for my fish tanks. She works researching zebrafish, and I tried to get more space, but they wouldn't give it to me. And even though I knew the men had more space than I did, and I said, well, how did you know that? And she said, well, I measured. And I was like, you measured? And she said, yeah, with a tape measure. Like, it was the most obvious thing in the world. And to her, it was, right? To her, it was go straight to the data. What do the numbers tell us? But that tape measure became the lead of my story. And really, as I say in the book, in the exceptions, it symbolized for women. It gave women a way to think about what they knew had been happening to them. They sort of intuited this had been happening to them. And they were like, oh, yes, here, someone is giving me a way to measure this, to express it. Like, that tape measure is now in the MIT Museum, which is a fact I love, because I do think it became emblematic of this shift to where we were talking about the very real concrete ways in which this happens.
Mm. Yeah, that's so interesting. It really came down to comparing square footage, right?
Right.
To show the inequities. So I want to invite Mimi and Gissette into the conversation, and maybe we could start, Mimi, if you could just tell us a little bit about your own journey as a scientist, and how these two works resonate or not resonate with what you've experienced along the way.
Well, first, I think actually I want to say we screened the movie. It's interesting that you chose that clip because we actually screened this movie, this film a couple of years ago during the pandemic, the neuro program did. And I was trying to get people to go see it, and I announced it at I don't know, I think it was a town hall or maybe it was a symposium of some kind of retreat. Anyway, so I told the students that they should see it. And then during the break, which was on Zoom, so it's fairly public, I did get pushback from one of my male colleagues whom I actually enjoy very much and I completely respect and like him, but it was almost exactly the same conversation where he was like, but this doesn't really exist anymore. Like, why are you showing this film now? And there was a lot of discussion in the break where I was like, I'm not super comfortable like representing all women, but but actually I can say that this does exist and that there is data and that we don't understand exactly how it affects every single person, but there are obviously there are assumptions and differences in treatment for women and men, but he refused to believe it actually because he's a scientist, and for him he has a wife who's a scientist, and he was like, my wife has never experienced anything like this, so obviously it does not exist. It's just like, lucky for her. I think so. I can say for me, right? I don't want to represent anybody else. For me, I would say, the ways that I have experienced discrimination are sort of bound up in not just being female, but being very small, for example, and Asian. And, there are lots of ways that people can dismiss, people who are different from the typical scientist and not respect people or question their expertise or their knowledge or their their interpretation of data, et cetera, et cetera. That's a kind of thing that I think is so routine for women that we don't even necessarily see it as discrimination or bias. But it's a particularly insidious, I think, systemic bias. And then I think for me, much of graduate school and postdoc, I didn't really feel as though I was biased against, but it wasn't until I had children that I realized, oh crap, I am biologically different from my male colleagues, and I'm experiencing this journey very differently than my male colleagues. So I think having children is one really obvious discriminator, and something that isn't. It's my colleague was saying, for example, like I'm not biased, and it's true. Most of the scientists that I know, male or female, are not intentionally biased, right? Like nobody's trying to oppress me necessarily, right? But there are sort of systemic and institutional sort of the ways that we do things and the ways that science operates. For example, demanding that you have a body of work and a sort of establish yourself at a time that is your childbearing fertile years. That's not anybody's fault, but that is a systemic problem if we really think that having women in science in their later years is a good idea, which I think it is. And the other way that I would say this sort of really strong way is not so much the way that people, again, like oppress me or anything, but it's more just like the assumptions that people make about how I should act, right? Especially as a boss or a PI, right? You hear this all the time, but it's really true. Like if I as a boss say something to a student or a colleague or facilities or the security guard downstairs, something that I say that is unexpected for sort of socialized acceptable female behavior, I get labeled a bitch. That doesn't happen to my male colleagues, right? Just different assumptions about how I should act toward other people, and what that means about my character or my fitness as a boss or a scientist. There are just very different rules applied to men and women, and that's again a systemic problem. So I guess that's how I would say I experience, this film, is like seeing it, just being like, wow, yeah, that's exactly right. It is an iceberg, and so much of it is invisible.
Hmm. Thank you. Yeah, I want to dig into some of the social norms that you're alluding to. But before we do that, Gissette, I want to bring you into the conversation and ask you the same question, just in terms of your career development and being here at Columbia, and also how you reflected on the film and/or book.
So thank you. Thank you so much for having me. And I just want to start by thanking Kate and Sharon for lifting our voices and, amplifying, because I think amplification of the problems are key to us getting change. I think, as you all said, when you were writing these, each institution had a problem, but unless you highlight one of them, the other ones won't come out. So I think that is key to us sort of achieving some type of recognition that this exists, and maybe in the future equity. I share Mimi's, we're at the same institution, so I think, I don't want to speak for her, but I myself, I would say the first thing that you feel as a woman scientist working at Columbia University is that you're privileged, right? So it is just like those women, it was a privilege to be given an opportunity to do your science at a top institution. And so that opportunity comes with some pain. And so the pain is not something that we can't handle, obviously, because we're here and we're happy and we're productive. But it comes, I don't think for me it's been hidden. I am a foreign medical graduate, so I had a very thick accent when I arrived at Columbia 20 years ago. And so there was a language issue. There was also a systems issue, like knowing when to speak, when not to speak. Most of the people in power at the time I came, and I think Dean Taylor came 2 years after my postdoc started. And so most of the people in power at that time were probably many males, and not in the department that I'm in, which is the Department of Medicine, definitely not a lot of tenured female faculty, and that has changed over time. And so what I can say is that despite the microaggressions and the macroaggressions at times, I don't want to use the word resilience because it's not a good word. And I hate when people, in my recommendation letters, people always write, she's resilient. And I'm like, no, I'm smart. And my science is great. And I learned quickly. And it was a steep hill and I climbed it. But that's not, people who are males describe you differently. They see it as, oh, she was given an opportunity. She was given a chance. But they never highlight, well, she was really smart, because other people that had really, really good training are here and she's hanging out with them and she's keeping up with them. So I think that's some of the differences that I've seen. I also have a really, really strong self-esteem, and I had a really strong family support. And so the fact that I haven't had any other social sort of crises arose during this time has allowed me to take on some of that and not, fail. Because I think that that's what happens, right? You not only have this, but then you have your child is sick, you don't get married, you got dumped by your husband, or many other things that happen in life, then women really track off. I have an interesting story that happened recently, because I think when we were planning this, we said, well, how is it different now than when you guys wrote the book or the film? And so I was at a thesis meeting, a thesis committee meeting, where for those on the call, I think maybe they're physicians and stuff. So there's 3 faculty members and there's a PI, the head of the lab with their student. And we're having our talk without the student in the room. And one of the senior members, the most senior member in the team, I said, well, maybe the candidate has a little imposter syndrome, which is common, right? In underrepresented minorities and things like this. And the senior member did not know what imposter syndrome was. And so, so we had this conversation. And what I was shocked about was that what his definition of imposter syndrome was. He thought it was about like coming from a socioeconomic studies that wasn't as good as other people, that they struggled to get where they were. And I was like, well, actually, in this sense, I wasn't really mentioning that. I think this person is very well qualified to do this PhD thesis. I think she just doesn't feel empowered to do it. And so very different than what they thought the definition was. And I think that that just highlights to you that despite all the training we have, all the conversations we have, everything that our PhD programs are doing, I think we need to do more and we need to do better. And so that's one example of like a quick, sort of story that I think.
Yeah, no, that speaks volumes. Thank you for sharing that. I'm wondering, it seems to me that relationship building is so key to one's career development. And just in terms of, I mean, we all know about the old boys club, or that kind of adage, what does that mean? It seems to me that networks were really important in the stories, Kate, that you're telling, and Sharon, you also, both in terms of presenting challenges, but also overcoming them. And I'm just wondering if you could share with us a little bit about the importance of networks and relationships.
Yeah, so when we first meet Nancy Hopkins in the book, and as I said, this is a story of women coming together, but it's told through Nancy's whole experience. And when we first meet her, she's a 19-year-old junior at Radcliffe, which was the girls' version of Harvard, and they did call them girls. And it's 1963, and she is in a lecture by James Watson, who has just been awarded with Francis Crick the Nobel Prize for decoding the structure of DNA. And Watson becomes Nancy's mentor, which is incredibly important to her because he knows everyone. It's a very small field at the time, and he's kind of the leader or a leader of it. And so first of all, she got excellent training, but also just sort of being in Jim's orbit was really important to her. When she goes to she gets her PhD, she goes to MIT to start working in the new cancer center there, and she doesn't really have a Jim Watson figure or someone who is a mentor to her in that way. But what's so interesting to me is when Nancy does, these women, there were, in 1994, when these women started their work, there were 15 women with tenure at the School of Science at MIT and 197 men. So just think of that disparity. It's incredible in 1994. And the women were really scattered all over the different departments of the School of Science. So they didn't, and if they were in the same department, they often didn't work in the same buildings. So that, as I often say, they had no control group, right? Like they had no one with whom to compare their experience. Once Nancy first meets one, first talk, sort of gradually talks, gets the courage to talk about the issue with one woman because she's really at her wit's end. She's like, I'm going to leave science if I can't do something about this. She talks to one woman, and the woman says, yes, I see this problem too. And in that moment, there's such power just having one ally. And then she goes and they discover together that they actually have, that there's a group of 16 of them. And that really, not only does it give them a sense of power, but it also allows them to go make their case more effectively. And there's this wonderful, to me, again, very moving moment in the book where the women, first Nancy thinks she's going to write a letter to the president of MIT and tell him all the problems. And then they decide they're not going to do that. They're going to go through the normal chain of command, and they're going to write a letter to the dean of science. And they spend all summer writing this letter, like making their case very carefully. And they're really worried. They set up a meeting with him. And they go meet him, and they're very worried. They're like, oh my God, the university must have called lawyers and we're going to be in trouble. And they go to him, and like the dean hasn't read their letter. He doesn't know why they're there. But there's 6 of the women, and they're sitting around his conference table, and he hears their stories one after another. And he recognizes, like scientists do, that, or like journalists do really, that this is a pattern. Had any one of those women come to him on her own, he would have said, and this is one of the reasons I call the book The Exceptions, he would have explained her story as he knew all these women. He was like, oh, that's this circumstance or that circumstance. She's the exception, not the rule. But when you see these women, when you hear their stories, one after the other, he realizes it is, in fact, the pattern. It is the rule. And he describes it as a real epiphany, like an epiphany that he's had in his scientific work. He's a physicist. So I do think that it's incredibly important to Nancy to have that network. And I would also say, like, that's kind of been the lesson to me coming out of writing the book, because I spent so much time when I started reporting the book, I was covering women in politics. I was doing a beat about women in politics. So I spent 2018 doing that beat and also starting to report this book. And then I spent 3 years writing the book. And then since 2020, I've been reporting on abortion. So it means I talk to women all day. And it's kind of the first time in my professional life that that's true. And it has really been life-changing for me because I do feel like I have this great network with me, just kind of backing me up.
Interesting. Sharon, did you find the same when you were putting the film together?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the MIT story was just incredible, and being able to see those women, come together. Like one of the first things we filmed actually was a meeting that they had that was celebrating the anniversary of this group of women. And so they all came together, we got to meet them in person. And we did all these interviews back to back. And that's when we first met Nancy. And it was just kind of, it's funny in the movie, it's like, it comes later in the film, but like in real life, it was the first thing we shot. But just seeing them all together is really, it's so heartwarming to see how they complement one another and how, the pieces fit together. And yeah, it was, I've taken a lot from filming with them. But the other stories too are about, we feature a woman named Jane Willenbring, who was the student of a geologist named David Marchant, who worked in Antarctica. And she went on a summer field research, the summer or winter, anyway, it's different down there because of the seasons, but they were there for a full season, like isolated from everybody else. And she only had a field assistant and another student named Adam there. And she didn't talk to anybody about her experience, but he was just constantly abusing her, just emotionally, sometimes physically, like pushing her down a mountain. And she didn't talk about it. And she didn't talk about it for a long time until she was pushed to decide to file a Title IX complaint. And that's when she reached out to Adam. And he had seen the whole thing. And he felt like, oh, you're so strong. Like you were fine. Like, I didn't think I needed to help. And it wasn't until she started talking and saying, actually, I really would have liked to talk to you about this. And and so I think for her, it was a moment of like, oh, I wish I would have said something, but also he should have said something. And it was, we were able to capture that discussion on camera. And then ultimately what happened is in her Title IX, we started filming, they hadn't actually made a decision about this professor. So the Boston University, this panel had been debating what to do about David Marchant, and they actually had recommended that he shouldn't face disciplinary action and that he was going to just return to being a professor. And that's where, when we were filming with Jane, that's kind of where things stood. And it wasn't until after we finished filming with her that we found out that the president of Boston University, Bob Brown, who was previously at MIT and friends with Nancy Hopkins, decided to fire him. And so it was really like, and that came because of Adam's letter and because of this anonymous woman's letter, who was also a student of David Marchant. It was people coming together and saying, these are my experiences, and this is a pattern again. So yeah, I found it like I think some people will say, oh, picture scientist is kind of depressing because you're bringing to light these stories and how frustrating, and for a young scientist starting out to be confronted with this reality. But I've always felt like, well, I don't know, I think that on the balance, the like camaraderie and the being able to talk about these things and find a community and find your support, like the way Rachel Burks, our chemist, found her people, and she's found this amazing network that she's created online. And she went from feeling like an outsider to being a total rock star in chemistry. Anyway, yeah, I think I hope that people take away some hope from the film too.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. Kate, you unmuted. Did you want to jump in there?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, it's not for nothing that the president of BU, of Boston University, who did this was Bob Brown, who had been provost at MIT. And, Bob Brown was an engineer, and he's steeped in this very male engineer culture, but he too was enlightened to this problem by these women. So there's just so many different ways in this story that Sharon and I both tell in which networks are important. Like, so one of the things is, yes, like there were actually five men, I think it's 5 men, maybe 4, who were at MIT at the time and really were convinced by this case that the women made. and went on to lead other universities. So so I think, and you know, became advocates for this. So I think like there's, yes, networks matter in many different ways. That was the only point I was gonna make.
Yeah. I want to turn to Mimi and Gissette just to ask you about your experience with networks, but also, you know, you both mentor, you're both running mentorship programs. So I'm curious what your advice is to junior faculty members, trainees who are women. But I also want to encourage the audience. I mean, we have, you know, about 100 people in the Zoom room, and would love to hear what your questions are, and to the extent that you want to share your experiences when you ask your questions, that would be great. So please do put those in the Q&A, and I'm going to try to get to as many as possible. But you know, Mimi and Gissette, maybe Mimi, I'll go to you first. You know, I personally too have really benefited from having these relationships with women who are more senior to me, and just even having one or two people who you know they create a safe space where you can talk about things you're just not sure about. Did I read that situation correctly? Those kinds of things. I'm just wondering what you recommend and in your mentorship programs for people who are coming down the pike. Yeah.
Huge fan of like peer mentoring groups, actually. I'm in like 3 or 4 at any one time myself, you know, just different kinds of groups. I mean, I think, you know, the research is clear at this point, you know, that really having one mentor is not enough, right? Everybody should have a network of mentors, right? And that includes people who are near peer or peers, people who are close to your own experience. And part of that is like just sharing experiences and solutions and strategies. That's huge. But also part of it is just having a sense of belonging, right? And feeling like, you know, when you were talking about imposter syndrome, Gissette, I was like, yes, exactly. I think almost every woman I know has a feeling of, you know, has imposter syndrome. And so, you know, the cure for that is to in terms of like feeling like you belong, is to create the space where you belong, right? With people that you have things in common with. And for me, that was huge in terms of my confidence, and also just giving me, it expands the strategies and solutions that you can come up with, and also just gives you, you know, in terms of collaborations and I mean, all science is very collaborative these days. So, you know, it actually is, it always has been, is a thing, right? But the networks did not traditionally include many of us, right? So having an alternative network, the old girls network or the new girls network, whichever one, right, is a great way of extending your reach. So networks, totally 100% in. What has your experience been, Gissette?
I agree with you. I think mentorship is key, especially at an institution like Columbia. You know, as a woman and as a diverse, underrepresented woman, and having a lab, it's key to have somebody to push you and that's in the room where decisions are made. And so when I have a mentee, I always tell them, you know, make sure you choose a good mentor that not only can mentor you and, you know, kind of guide you through, but also sponsor you. So it gives you opportunities to go somewhere where you don't think you can go. And so those opportunities are rare at higher institutions because everyone wants to be the leader. And especially, you know, I had an amazing mentor, Henry Ginsberg, who, you know, I love him to death. He's a career mentor, now a colleague. But, you know, at some point when I got independent and the older I get and the more established I get and the less imposter syndrome I have, I'm like, maybe I don't need to do his work anymore. You know, maybe I don't have to be nice. And so, you know, my own personal bias of, you know, they've helped you so much. So you want to be grateful. You want to be, you know, return the favor. And, you know, your book, Kate, put chills up my spine because there's so many stories that I've heard of colleagues that have gotten touched the wrong way or felt the wrong relationship. And, you know, the stories, it's not so easy to talk about, right? Like, how do you know who what time do you have to spend so much time with someone that you're going to share this with them? And then the other thing is that, remember, as we're mentoring people that are younger than us, they're going to apply for a job somewhere and they want a reference letter. So they don't want to tell us how vulnerable they are because they think we're going to judge them. And so I generally, off the bat, tell people, you can tell me as much as you want, but also realize that I'm a person, right? I have feelings and I make decisions and I need to get my lab working and, I need to produce. And so I have very open conversations, and hence I devoted most of my mentorship to senior people because I feel that direct mentorship is probably you're less able to do that with very young people because, they're just vulnerable. So that's the way I do it. We have this program Aspire that Sandra spoke about. And I think if it wasn't for that program that started with 7 of us peer mentoring each other through a grant award at Columbia through the CTSA, I don't think I would have had such an incline in grants, in salary, in understanding what my role was to present at different meetings and accepting invitations, not accepting invitations, reviews. And so, you have so many roles and you're pressure all the time. There's this constant pressure to achieve. And so I think, Mimi has many peer mentorship groups. I don't think I have many because I don't have time, but I think this group, we're now paying it forward. And so this group now takes a cohort every year of from different divisions, which is something that Nancy did very well, right? She found people outside her division to compare. And so I think that that's the beauty of this peer mentorship group, that is people at very different stages and divisions, and they're able to help each other. And they're at the same stage. They don't have a dean telling them what they think is best, but they have their peer. So it's kind of cool.
I want to ask you one more question, and then we really will go to the audience questions. But I've been, as an anthropologist, that's my background. I've been rereading a lot of the work of Mary Douglas, who's a British anthropologist, and she has written this book about, how do institutions think, and she's really, trying to understand how do institutions actually create social norms. I mean, yes, you have individuals who are acting in a particular way, but it's really at the institutional level that things get really structural and embedded, entrenched in terms of policy and practice. And, I wonder, given the lawsuit and maybe leadership at different institutions recognizing there's a problem, what is it that institutions can do that's going to have the biggest impact in intervening on some of these social biases around what women can and cannot do?
So I don't know if you want me to start. I'm interested to hear from people who are actually on faculties because I'm not. But I do think that there are small things that they can do, like the meeting that starts at 4:30, and doesn't finish until 6, and maybe who's responsible for the childcare. I mean, this is something I think is starting to happen already, right? Like, or has happened in a lot of places. Like, so the meeting would end at 6, and the woman who's in that meeting doesn't want to be the one to say, I have to go pick up my kids, right? So can you just change the meeting to early? Like, is it going to hurt? Like, will it hurt the operation of the day or of the institution to move that meeting earlier so the woman doesn't have to speak up and identify herself as like the one who has kids? Sharon said there have been a lot of changes, daycare, things like that. The hardest part really is this question of, Chuck Best, who is the president of MIT, who made this incredibly bold statement acknowledging discrimination, said to Nancy, like, anything I can measure, I can fix, right? I can fix salaries, I can fix lab space. I can't fix marginalization because I don't know how to do that, right? So, and that is the thing. Someone mentioned this in the chat, in the Q&A or the chat. The socializing that happens, right? Like the guys who go out for a beer or the lunchtime basketball game. And nobody wants to be the scold who says like the guys can't all play basketball together at lunch, right? But like, So I think, one of the things that institutions can do is until you start seeing women applying for, we know this from the studies, from the research, women are less likely to apply for jobs, even if they're well qualified. A man with lesser qualifications will put up his hand. So if you don't see women applying for a job, go tap them on the shoulder. It may take a little more of doing that. I would say don't assume, it's very important to provide childcare. There was no daycare at MIT when this whole thing happened, but don't assume that children are the problem or that women, for me in my own career, the big problem has always been like the assumptions about me that somehow after I had kids, I was going to be a different kind of employee, that I wouldn't bring the same passion to the job, which is not true. Don't make assumptions about people and what they can do, what they're willing to do after they have children. I think a lot of this is just open dialogue, but also being willing to challenge our quick assumptions, right? The usual assumptions that we have. I think people have talked in this panel about how, we don't, I think Gissette said this, like the people who we expect to see in these roles are not women of color, not people of color. So when, we have to challenge ourselves, like, are we looking at those people differently? Would we be looking at them differently if it were a white man speaking? So I guess I have many more thoughts on this, but I want to hear others as well.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's a good start. Mimi, yeah.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I was just thinking of an example. Even talking about the issues, right, is great. But when Gissette was talking about, the different words that are used to describe men versus women, for example, right? It really made me think about this. I wrote a letter of recommendation for one of my students, and a senior female faculty member actually said, I want to talk to you about this letter. So you use the word brilliant. Is that the right word, or you want to say really smart? And then what about persistent instead of determined? Or, she wanted to like change the language of my letter. And it made me really realize, like, holy cow, like this is that's the way that people want to describe women versus men. And I think that's something that I think we don't think about. Oftentimes, we're also when we're reading letters, for example, right? And so, just being aware of that really early in my career, like, made me realize, okay, so this is something that we can change, right? That's really easy and really tangible, but something that I wouldn't necessarily have thought of on my own, right? So I think talking about things and sort of putting light on the issue and just saying, there are all these subconscious things that are happening, and we should just be aware of it and think, is that really, do I mean brilliant? Yeah, actually, I do mean brilliant. She's a brilliant student. And so, we had this discussion. I don't know if I changed her mind, but, I think just talking about it made a difference, hopefully.
That's so interesting. So, Mimi, it makes me wonder, given that evidence does count for some things, is there a project in there where we should be looking at promotion letters and blinding it for, gender and sex, and just reading what the adjectives are and to see how they play out? I mean, wouldn't that be interesting?
I think
Yeah.
there might be some research into that
There
already.
is. Yeah. And there's also there's wonderful research that shows that men and women alike, right? I don't want to make it sound like we're having a discussion about how bad men are, right? This is cultural. We're all doing this. Men and women alike are much more likely to use the word genius to apply to men, right? And they also are more likely to think that this is why science is such an interesting field in which to study these biases. They assume that science requires some kind of brilliance, particularly when you're talking about pure math or theoretical physics, because they involve a lot of numbers. And so the effect of that is that women think like, oh, I'm not a genius. I can't go into science because that requires genius. So there's like, it affects the self-selection as well. I always tell the story about, you can tell a little bit from a clip of Sharon's film, that Nancy has this slight British accent, which, although she grew up in New York City, not far from Columbia, she had an English grandmother who lived near her. And when I first started talking to her pretty much every day in 2018, I noticed that she kept using the word brilliant. And I was like, oh, is that the thing that British people do? Like, where, the tea is brilliant, the scone is brilliant. And so I asked her about it, and she said, oh, no. It's just that I noticed that people kept describing the men as brilliant, and nobody ever used that word to apply to women. So I decided that I was going to do it, and I was just going to call the women brilliant. And I was like, that's brilliant, right? Like, why not? So, you know.
Oh, she's very a good observer. Yeah, that's Gissette.
I guess, going back to your question of, what's next, right? Like, what do we do? And, we're living in a very tough time, right? Because there's many things going on. And I always equate this to when I came to Colombia, I'm from the Dominican Republic, and usually, Dominicans travel in packs and we like each other. We like to hang out. And so I didn't have that pack. There's no one else that's from the Dominican Republic with a lab at Columbia. I am the sole person, male or female. And so we're not having merengue or, food parties at the lab. And so I think that people generally tend, and research has been done on this, tend to gravitate to things that they have in similar. And so I think the university, is trying to do this, which is to bind people by other things that are not race and, where you went to school, or, sort of bringing type of events where we talk about what other things can be binding you, if we have the same science, or if we have the same methods, or, there has to be other ways of us networking and building our networks. And so my networks and the way that I was able, and you saw through my foundation work, I had to go outside of Columbia to find people that actually would help me to feel the way that I wanted to feel, because the structure that is here right now doesn't fit what I want to do. Because everyone who's, looks like me does like epi research and it's interested in health disparities. And I'm interested in lipoproteins. I want to learn more basic science. I want to know how EVs are being secreted. And, people that look like me don't do that. So I think that, they're starting early. So we have high school programs in the summer and we bring them in really early. They see us, they see me, we talk. Last Saturday, I spent, an hour and a half over lunch doing a Zoom with high school students from our neighborhoods. I think the more they see us, the more we talk to them. I also, I want to bring up something that was mentioned in the chat, where it's like, women to women, that feistiness of us. I have begun to call it out. So, I have said at meetings, I am not here to judge another woman's character or her decisions. Let's just move on beyond that. Let's deal with the problem. And, not that she's what Mimi said, people call her. But was the decision made? Is it a good decision? Is it a bad decision? So try to take away the stigma of what it means to make a decision by a woman. So I've been in plenty of meetings, Aspire is 7 women. So there has, even though we're peer to peer and we're helping each other, there has been times when we need to make decisions, and we're try to be very asexual about the decisions that we make. And so that's one thing. And then I worry, because if all these DEI efforts and all these mandatory things that have been put in place that in some ways have helped people advance, I worry that the pipeline is not going to be there. And from writing a training grant 2 years ago, I can tell you that I looked at the statistics of underrepresented women that were staying in science and coming to us, and it was so low. And so the numbers, where are we going to recruit from? And New York is expensive. We just don't have the resources to support them. So I worry a lot about what the pipeline is going to look like in the future.
Yeah, I mean, that you bring up, and one of our audience members also brings up just the kind of attack on DEI now, and that many programs are being eliminated, and what will this mean in terms of whatever progress was occurring with women in particular in science, with the pathways programs potentially being eliminated. What does the future have for us in terms of trying to promote the progress that I think has been experienced over the last decade or so? Any thoughts on that?
I mean, I do think that if you look at some of the newer research, there is great interest in, one of the things that's improved is there is great interest in hiring women at the assistant and associate level, right? So there is, I think, there's enough awareness about the issue that things have changed. The
Mhm.
problem still is how do you treat those women over the years? Like how, do those women end up feeling like they don't belong? They're spoken over in meetings, they're not listened to, they're discounted, they're not given credit for their ideas, all the same problems that have been there for so long. I think so. So I think I think there is still an interest in getting people in the door. I think we just, it sounds so simple, but I think it really is true. Like we just need to keep talking about this and reminding ourselves of we're talking about all the different nuanced ways that people do get pushed aside and do get pushed out of science ultimately.
Yeah, and the loss to science, right? I mean, yes, we're losing people, but those people are important in terms of the quality of the science. I mean, the research suggests that it's absolutely true. I'm looking at Angela Town's question here, and let's see here. Was it Angela or was it? Oh, it keeps disappearing, the questions. I think it was, oh, sorry, Susan Steinberg. She says that she's an MIT grad, and she's questioning Nancy Hopkins as being the messenger here, and speaking specifically to what what you actually, Kate, really discuss well, this kind of trope around losing women to motherhood, which was a theme. And, we think about that. Is that still a theme in science? Mimi, you alluded.
So I saw Susan's question and I did want to answer it. So, and Susan says, she views Nancy as kind of a flawed messenger for this because Nancy has said, like, she thinks science is incompatible with having a career in science is incompatible with having children. So just to be clear, this is Nancy no longer believes this. She thinks that now there have been so many changes, like we do, we have daycare and at the time these women came together, again, 1994, not dark ages, no woman had taken maternity leave because there was such a stigma around it. It was just like, you won't get tenure if you do this. Men were taking it, women were not. But, and so this is something that I found really interesting in reporting the book was trying to piece together, like when, Nancy starts out as not a feminist, not an activist. What happened to her over that 20 years between when she starts at MIT and she comes together with this group of women to change her mind? And so in 1976, which is early in her days, she does write this piece in the Radcliffe Quarterly where she says, you can't do this job and have a family life. Like that's just her, blanket statement. She really did believe that was the problem for women. And one of the great revelations of this MIT report was that in fact it is not children who are holding women back. Children are an issue, certainly, and we should make adjustments to so that people, men and women alike, can have careers and integrate that with their family life. But Nancy believed that science was a meritocracy. It didn't, but if you had kids, it would pull you away. When you look at this group of 16 women at MIT who came forward and said this, half of them didn't have children. They were incredibly accomplished. So you looked at this group and you couldn't say, well, the reason they feel discriminated against is because they have children and they really don't want to work as hard. Like that, they really gave the lie to that idea. So I think it's important, but I do want to be clear, like, this is something that has changed. This is a great sign of progress. It's not easy to have kids and have a career in science, but it can be done. And I think even Nancy does believe that.
Mm-hmm. And this brings me back to this question about institutional practice and policy. I mean, certain things have developed over time that hopefully is mitigating this kind of motherhood tax, if you will, that really penalizes women right at the time. I mean, there's a convergence, right, when they're supposed to be most productive. Mimi, you alluded to this. I'm wondering if there are other policies and practices that the institution can adapt as a way of trying to mitigate that bias when somebody's thinking about hiring someone, but they look like they just got married perhaps, and they may be lost for a few years because they are going to end up rearing children, not having that be such an important calculus for some people when they're making these kinds of investments in people in their labs or on their faculty.
I have a suggestion. I think the university should pay for maternity leave because for students in particular, but also postdocs. Because when I was a postdoc, I mean, it makes a big difference in your relationship with your boss, right? If they are paying for you to have children. And that is just a formula for resentment, right? Because money is tight and they need people to be active and working and committed to science and all of this stuff, right? But if you remove the financial component, then most scientists would be very supportive of somebody having children. So when I was a postdoc, I had two babies, and I was in California. And in the state of California, as soon as you are employed, you buy into their Family Leave Act, and your maternity leave gets paid for by the state of California, or insurance companies, basically. And then there isn't as much of an issue in terms of, my relationship with my boss. There's still all kinds of other issues. Like, I don't remember most of my postdoc, because I was like, breastfeeding or pregnant, like more than 50% of the time. But that was, I was able to, I feel very lucky. I had that choice and I had that opportunity because, and did not ruin my relationship with my postdoc advisor. So if somebody's listening at Columbia University, like, we could do that. There should be money set aside for women who want to have babies.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Yeah. Gissette, you wanted to say something?
I concur, so I have a funny story. Mimi and I have a friend in common, and she just had a baby. She had her 2 kids now after becoming a professor. And so I had my kids as soon as I got my faculty position, 2 back to back. And so 15 and 14 now. And so, you can see the progression of careers. It's not a joke. It's, it's just, it consumes you. And I think money helps, but I don't think money is the answer, because I also think, so they are policies, right? We get longer time to tenure track because of the kids. Now there's money for traveling to meetings. Now there's money that you can pay someone in your house. But I think the programs are not easy to use, and people don't know about them. And so I think, like, creating a package for a postdoc to come with, sort of like a faculty comes, right? A faculty comes and say, oh, your kids are going to go to the Columbia School and we're going to pay for it, and parking is here, and these are your benefits. And so if you hire a postdoc and you have that, I just don't know where that money is going to come from, right? Because we're already stressed with research money. And so, but there has to be that investment where you say, and it's not only for women, we forget about the men, right? Men want to have families and their wives want to work. And so it may be that the package is for the men to have kids, because they also want to be with their kids. I think we forget that the new generation of dads wants to spend time with their children. They want to be home. They're like, well, how long are you taking off? Because I want to go home too. So I think that the conversation is a little bit more broad, but I agree with Mimi that creating policies that encourage people to want to work, to have secure housing. It's really hard for, recruitment of people to do science, like on a scientific track. Clinicians don't want to stay in science. I have a fellow now who's a vascular surgeon, and she's seen me for 2 years taking a break during residency. And she's like, well, how am I going to do this and also operate? And then when am I going to have kids? And she's in her 30s, and how am I going to make money, and how are we going to live? And, is that everything going to be my husband? And she did get married now, but it's not such an easy conversation. And the worst part is that no policy is one fits all, because we're all so different and we all start at different stages. So I think it's challenging for sure, but I agree with Mimi, more money always solves the problem. Like, having your kids in a good school or being taken care of by the right person. It's really nice.
Mm-hmm. Good. I wanted to go back to one of the questions earlier. I think it was Emily Kribas, who is really trying to highlight the power of storytelling. And this comes out very beautifully in both Kate and Sharon's work. And I'm just wondering, are you finding that the ability to tell these stories and women sharing their stories with others might be more powerful than the actual facts in terms of changing minds and also changing behavior?
I think it was that, so this report, the MIT report was, as I said, it resonated because of the tape measure, right? The idea it had data, but there was an immediate backlash where people said, oh, this is junk science because there's such a small number of women. This is not a real control group. This is not a representative sample. It can't be. There are too many small numbers. And as an economist, and professor said to me, university professor at one of the Ivy League schools said to me recently, that's always the problem with women. Like we want to talk about it, but there's such small numbers that we can't make our case. So yes, it really was. It's not just the data. It was the data and the stories that changed people's perceptions. The reason that Chuck Vest, the president of MIT, decided to talk about this was when he first looked at the data, he was like, well, the junior faculty, the women as junior faculty, they seem happy. And then one of the senior faculty, who was really one of the most accomplished women at MIT, who he really wanted to keep, said, well, I felt the same way as a junior faculty member. And it was like, oh, so it really is, are there these epiphany moments? I would also say, just as a reporter now covering abortion, we're seeing this with abortion as well. If you look at the polls, there is more public support for abortion, and a right to abortion. Which is, and that number has actually been pretty stagnant for decades. What has changed it, again, this pollsters have shown this, what's changed it is that more people are hearing stories about, in particular, women who need abortions and are being denied them, even though there's some medical emergency, right? So they're understanding the nuances of the issue. So the same thing happens, I think, with women in science or with the idea of marginalization. The more we tell our stories, the more people start thinking, oh, that's how it happens. I mean, this is what I've devoted my life to, my career to, is just telling people stories and trying to put them with data to kind of hold up a mirror to ourselves.
Yeah, similarly, I mean, with the film, I think I wrote in the comment, I'm a storyteller. I really believe strongly in the power of personal stories. And I do think, I mean, even now, like if you look in the politics and like really everywhere, stories are the thing that move culture along and can take us back too. So it's something that we thought a lot about with the film, is like, what's the balance of the data to the stories? And we really tried, like we had a long cut. We saw so many rough cuts, obviously, of this film, but there was a really long one that was like 2.5 hours long. And it was very much like many studies, lots of data, kind of paired with the stories, and it was about 50-50. And we just were like, oh my God, I don't know if this is right. And so it took a lot of finessing to get to the point where we decided to land, which I think was more like 30-70. I mean, that's not a scientific number, but that's kind of how it felt to us in the edit. But it's the pairing of both that really makes it, like, even if there's just a little bit, like if it feels like a good balance, I think it can be very powerful. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I imagine that the craft of storytelling, I mean, the reader or the viewer needs to see themselves in some way in this story, and the kind of the representation of different lived experience becomes so important, I imagine, so that different people can really understand and see themselves in these stories. Is that fair to say? Or
yeah, I mean, I think what you're talking about is really compassion, and that, yes, that's definitely true. This, like anything, or empathy, right? We talk a lot about empathy, but what does it actually mean? And I think that's it, being able to hear someone's story and think like, okay, maybe it doesn't 100% match up, but I can see something of myself in your story. I can see your perspective.
mm-hmm. And the courage. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Mimi. Yes.
I was just going to say that's also the way to enact change, because I think people don't, everybody wants to think of themselves as not being biased, right? I mean, nobody is like, well, not nobody, but like most people are not intentionally biased, and most people do not want to intentionally marginalize anyone. But, you hear a story and you're like, oh, that kind of thing, I can see how that would happen without any malintent, but how that might make somebody feel like they're being marginalized, right? And I think that's just a way to make it real and concrete, so that people can change their own behavior, so that, they won't do that anymore. But I think, when you present it as like a principle, everybody's in on that. Everybody's like doubles down and says, I'm not like that. I'm terrific to women. You know what I mean? And most people are, right? But it's just like opening their minds to sort of things that they might not consider or see, right? You have to tell a story to make it real.
Mm-hmm.
I will say also with the movie, just a little tidbit from behind the scenes is that we, even while we were making the film, we had a hard time finding people who were willing to share their stories. You know, outside of MIT and the story of the MIT 16, I think originally, yeah, like it was hard to find people who wanted to share, and they would tell us off the record, and then they'd be like, "Oh no, I don't want to be in the film," you know. So that was, you know, happens all the time, and you can't force. It was obviously like, yeah, you know, it's easy for me to say, sure, share your stories. Like, I'm a storyteller, I want to tell your story, but if you don't want to, or if you feel like there's a reason why you need to not share it until you're a tenured faculty, it's completely understandable.
And I think one of the reasons that people don't want to share their stories, or the scientists, the women that I talked to in reporting the book, not just the MIT women, but other women, is that they really do feel like there is this assumption in science, or in medicine as well, that it really just is about the work. Like there's a purity to it, right? Like the whole idea of, you know, I went, you know, one university, they talked about wearing white as a symbol of like how pure science is, right? And so for their big annual like convocations and things, they all wear white. And I think so there is this idea that like if you talk about discrimination, it's a problem with your work. It's not really a thing. This is objective. It's not subjective. Like it's just that you're not. So I think these women don't want to make them. There are two things. One, I think they don't want to raise their hand because they think like they'll look like they're making excuses. That's one thing. And the second thing is that so many women talk to me about, they just worry that if they started to think about these things and what might be discrimination, and is that discrimination, like it takes time to do that and it can throw you off track. You want to put all of your time into doing your science, into doing your job. So you don't want to get distracted by the idea of like, oh, was that discrimination? So the only thing you can do is just keep pushing ahead. So yeah, I think that it is hard to get people to tell their stories for that reason, to go public.
Yes. Yeah, especially I would imagine when there's no option. I mean, if you were to admit you're in a context or an environment where there's rampant bias, but how do you, what's the other option for you? To go to another university where there's also bias. So it's very hard to confront these things if there's not really evidence.
And again, that's where science is different and is an interesting case study for this, because like in science, the work takes so long, right? It's not like you can just, like I could, you know, get up and go work at some other organization and write my stories there. I don't have like a, you know, a 5-year commitment where I've been working in a lab for 5 years and I'm at year 7, I might get my PhD. Like, you know, it's much harder to walk away from that experience.
Yes, absolutely. And the relationships that are built within the scientific community. Yeah,
right.
Absolutely. I want to take a moment to just ask the panelists if you have questions for each other, because I know I've been kind of directing questions to each of you, but I want to give you a chance to ask each other any questions that you might have, given your different vantage points to this topic.
I have a question, but I just want to say that like I saw Sharon's movie, I think probably at the same time that Mimi did during COVID. And it's not something that I would have watched if it wasn't because of COVID, because, you know, it's hard, right? And then I listened to the book, the whole book. And, you know, I was neglected to read the book because I just don't want those, you know, once you read it, you also start thinking, oh my God, these things are still happening. How can it still be happening if in 1960s, you know, if there's been so much growth and there's so much acknowledgement of this, why is this structural division still there? But I'll stop there because I think there's some really good stuff going on in the chat that I've been reading.
Yeah.
And, you know, I think there was some comments that women should have babies earlier, that, you know, I think, you know, I will just give my opinion about how I felt about having a family. So I come from a family that is an immigrant to the US, and we have 4 siblings. And my parents, I did not grow up poor. We went bankrupt and then immigrated to this country. And we have quite an amazing story of resilience and just growth and, coming to this country and being given the opportunity as professionals, my parents were. And so having children was never a question in me of whether I was going to have them or not, or whether I needed a career or not. And so I think having children should be a decision of your beliefs in family and not, and I have really separated that lately. I'm going to be in my 50s now, and I really like parsed out, this is my academic family, this is my home family. And so I think if you put them all together, it gets messy. And so I think that you can give yourself the space. And I tell fellows this way, this is my way, Gisette's way. There's other ways. People, do it with the nanny at home and she wakes up at 6 and takes care of the kids. I didn't want to do it that way. I wanted to be a mom. I rush home every day to cook for my children. I wake up every day at 5:30 so they can have a warm breakfast. That's my style. And I think you have to make that decision. Yes, haven't had a nature paper yet, but it's coming because they're going to leave. And then I'm going to have, the rest of my years to continue to do the work that I want to do and the science that I want to do. And so that is, there are options for people that want to do both. So I don't think, extremes of, thinking about in extremes. I think you have to really know yourself and your needs as a person, because you cannot go through life being frustrated if you find the right man that you're not going to have a child or so anyway, that's my thought on that.
Okay, good. Well, we're almost out of time, and I do want to give each of you just some, one last moment to tell us what you think should be kind of the next step in terms of making progress in this space. Like, what's something that you would leave us with in terms of a next step?
Well, I do like to talk about changing, doing a little bit of thought experiment with yourself. And if you watch Sharon's film, you'll see Mazrin Banaji, the woman we saw in the clip, who really is one of the pioneers of this idea of unconscious bias. She gives people a test right? And so what Mazrin and what she finds and what the research has found is that people are just slower to associate maybe science or intellect or careers or intelligence with women. So I always say to people, like, just when you're listening to someone talk, right? When you're listening to a politician or listening to your doctor or whoever it is, like, think to yourself, do the little thought experiment. Like, would I be hearing this information differently if it came from a woman or a man? Like, how is gender affecting this? And you don't have to be punishing about it or, scolding, but just kind of like allow yourself to be a little bit curious about the bias. I think, as we talked about compassion earlier, empathy, I think compassion and curiosity are really, really important steps as we go forward.
Mm-hmm.
I love that. Yeah, I think what we were talking about earlier really resonates with me with the resumes or kind of how you describe yourself, and that study that Corinne Moss-Rakusin does in the film about the two resumes with the different names, same resume. I think about that a lot ever since we filmed this movie. I think about it all the time, and I think about what words I use to describe people, and I think I would just challenge everybody to use the word brilliant more, and to really think about how when you're writing somebody a letter of recommendation, or when you're putting yourself forward for something, like, how do you want to present yourself, and try to just try to challenge what you might normally write, or what you might feel more comfortable writing. Or I do it a lot with, like, trying to be a little more assertive than maybe I'm comfortable. I feel I have imposter syndrome just like everybody else. And so I'm kind of like, okay, I'm going to be pushier. And, anyway, that's, one little thing you can try.
Okay, great. Mimi?
I would say talking to each other with respect, regardless of who the person is. Do you know what I mean? Like, I can say for me, like, being very small, I'm very short. I'm like 4'7.5" inches tall. And is that, a lot of times, at least before I had all this gray hair, people would assume that I was young because of my height. And so I could see how people treated people that they thought were below them, right? And it's a little window into like, if we want to make things better, we just make things better for everybody. I mean, we're talking about women here or people of color, but like everybody, right? Like, students and also, women faculty or whatever, a lot of it is respect, right? Women may feel like they're not being respected or trusted because of what they look like, as opposed to, what they're saying. There was somebody in the chat who talked about, saying that it's not assumed that she has a body of knowledge equivalent to other people's. So when she asks a question or professes to being, not knowing something, then that's taken as a much larger statement about her than anyone else. So, just being mindful of our assumptions about other people and speaking to people with respect, and just understanding, like, we're all we're all contributing in different ways, and there's no cost actually to like talking to each other with respect. I mean, there's a very cheap and easy way to give people the benefit of the doubt. I think would be another way to put it.
Gissette.
I think I said a lot. I would say the one thing we haven't talked about is about loving yourself. And I think that applies to a lot of the things that we struggle with as women, and especially Women's History Month. Love your good, love your bad, admit when there's parts of you that you're not going to love so much. And I think that I always tell people this, they are going through a tough time. It's like my go-to sentence because I don't know what to say most of the time. And I said, you can't love others until you love yourself. And so you can't do good until you do good to you. And so I think that if you practice good on you first, then it's easier to be good to others because you know what feels good. And so that would be my take-home message, that, try to think of like, how do you want to be treated? And then that's how I found my happy place.
That's great. Thank you. That's wonderful. Well, we are out of time. I really want to thank all four of our panelists today for sharing so much, and for the brilliant works by Kate and Sharon. Honestly, if you have not read the book or you haven't seen the film, you must do so. It's well worth it. And I also want to thank the Teams resource at the Irving Institute for Clinical and Translational Research and the Division of Ethics, Bioethics and Film Organizing Committee for their support in planning the event. Thank you, audience, for your many questions. And I wanted to also invite you for our next Division of Ethics event on April 19th, which is our Ethics Grand Rounds, where our panel of experts will discuss challenges and solutions concerning climate change and associated health risks. You can subscribe to our mailing list to stay up to date with the details of this event as well as others. The links should be in the chat. And then finally, you will see a post-event survey pop up when this webinar ends. And I really encourage you to complete it. We take your comments very seriously. They have been very helpful in terms of us developing our various series and bringing new topics and speakers to you. So please do fill it out. But again, thank you to everyone. This was a terrific conversation. We're also very grateful. Take care.